Okay, can you hear me now? It says that I've got audio going through. Sorry about that. I thought I had it all put together and apparently I didn't. Let's just start from the beginning, I guess. Let's just go back. Okay. So, let's start from the beginning. Sorry about the audio thing. My name is Stickador Gooberson. I go by Sticky. Today we're going to be discussing vampires. Uh, More realistically, we're going to be going over what we see as lore of the time and how that has affected modern tellings of vampirism, such as ways you fight them, symptoms that we see, so on and so forth. So, there are several different types of vampires. We have financial vampires, we have time vampires, but the ones we're going to be talking about today are just normal blood vampires. So, the history of vampires, we see accounts of vampirism going as far back as ancient Greece. We don't have a whole lot of information on that, or at least I wasn't able to dig much up, other than saying that there was kind of what you would perceive as like a proto vampire. Like it was something new that was affecting the people, but they didn't quite have enough information on it yet to really know exactly what it was. But looking at the way the things were done, we have reason to believe that this might have been the first occurrences of vampirism. We also find stories of vampirism in Judaism around the 16th and 17th century. The idea that blood is being stolen was something that was very much seen as a taboo. And there are a few stories of vampirism. I didn't have much time to really dig heartily into the stories themselves. Some stuff is behind a paywall, so there was only so much I could research. Most of what we see in modern vampirism comes from Eastern Europe and some parts of Asian countries, depending on which vampires we're looking at. Ways that you could be infected, obviously being bit. Um, Biting is what we know as the way to become a vampire. Like if you're bit, then all of a sudden you have like so much time before you turn into one. Blah blah blah. Some stories talk about cures and whatnot. There's also the way of it being done by sorcery. Committing suicide was also a way of becoming a vampire. The idea that you were taking in vain a gift given by a creator and thus were cursed. So if you committed suicide, it was believed that at the time that it would cause the person to become a vampire. A contagion. This kind of goes along with what like the idea that being bit is infects you with a virus that then causes the vampirism. Kind of like The Last of Us with the fungal infection zombies. This would kind of go in the same vein. Cats jumping over a corpse. That one I did not know about, and it made me laugh a little bit. But apparently, if you saw a cat, I would imagine a black cat, but they didn't really specify the color of the cat, jumping over a corpse, it could cause the corpse to be reanimated and come back as a vampire. If you were born with teeth, I have never seen a child born with teeth. That would honestly kind of creep me out because I've got an 8-month-old and he's just now getting his first tooth. So the idea that a kid just pops out with a full mouth of teeth would creep me out. So it was believed that if you were born with teeth, then you're just that there's a vampire. Being born on Christmas, I believe this kind of goes along with the idea that these are religious holidays meant to be for observing particular deities, particular and for Christmas specifically for Christianity. So the idea that being born on Christmas would result in a curse, if that kind of makes sense. if you're not born on Christmas, being born between Christmas and Epiphany, which Epiphany happens on January 6th. So that gives you like an additional 2 to 3 weeks where if you pop out a kid, it could be a vampire. Okay, so the symptoms of the infection. Everybody knows these. Aversion to light and garlic. Biting other people. Elongation of the canine teeth, which we all know as fangs. And quick healing. A lack of reflection. And in some cases, depending on the source, shape-shifting into a bat. Other lore says bat or wolf. Either or. Like I said, it depends on the source and the location. So let's take a look at a modern look at the symptoms, seeing them as a more educated and enlightened look on what was brought up to explain things. So sensitivity to light and smell, these both come from either rabies or porphyria. Porphyria. Bleh, sorry. Medical names are really hard to pronounce. So porphyria causes damage to the skin from sunlight. So the idea is that if a person goes out in the sun, it burns the skin and causes damage. In some people, we see that it causes a lot of freckles. Other people get very intense sunburns. There are some people that just cannot go out in the sunlight at all due to how bad their porphyria is. This was seen as a example of vampires being unable to go out in the day. If we look at the fangs, this can come from tuberculosis and from decay of the body. So when a vampire was believed to be in a community, the first thing that they would do is they would identify who they believed the vampire to be, and they would exhume the corpse of that person. When the body was dug up, it was looked for signs of what they would call proper decomposition, which essentially meant that they just wanted the person to look like they've been dead long enough. And if they dig them up and they look like they're freshly dead, you know, they expect, oh, this person has been a vampire and has been coming back out again. Both death and tuberculosis cause a receding of the gums, which makes it look like the teeth, but in particular the canine teeth, to look like fangs. As I mentioned before, could also be from tuberculosis. This was both blamed as the reason for the fangs, but also what was causing the families of the deceased to be passing away, because tuberculosis is so contagious. So one person in the family would catch it and pass away, and because they were in close proximity to their family, they would all catch tuberculosis, and slowly but surely everyone in the family would pass away. So the community would look at it and say, oh, there's a vampire. They've come back to attack their family. Which is also something important to the lore. Vampires either exclusively or started with their own family. So if the family members started passing away and then they ran out of those and members in the community started passing away, that they would say, oh, there's a vampire, we need to take care of this. And of course, biting, which is another example of rabies. A lack of reflection. So I don't have concrete proof of this. This is going along with further research that I am doing at the moment, but old mirrors were made with silver nitrate. Silver is believed, particularly at the time, to be a pure metal. And because of that, it's seen as holier, and I have reason to believe that the silver nitrate in a mirror, which is literally just polished silver, is the reason why they couldn't see reflections. The idea that a cursed person could not have a reflection because they had no soul, but it was a reflection given by a pure metal. So I have reason to believe that in the modern day, with mirrors that are not made of silver nitrate but are more like an aluminum that has been polished, or even photography, because there's no silver involved, their reflection would still show up. And of course, silver is seen as a pure metal, which is why it's used for fighting the paranormal, which we see along with werewolves. So there were believed to be some cures. Originally, consumption was believed, tuberculosis was believed to have the effects of a vampire, and so they would dig up the bodies to confirm whether or not the person that had died was the one that was doing the damage. If the body had not been decayed enough, they would take the inner organs, particularly the heart, the liver, and the lungs, or depending on the situation, these would be burned and made into a tonic that was then given to the afflicted family members. Obviously, that didn't work too often, and people still passed away. So, over several years, we've found different ways of killing vampires. For one, using the organs as a tonic. It's kind of hard for a vampire to keep coming back if you've taken all of the parts that it needs to keep coming back out of its body. The stake through the heart, which everybody knows. Beheading and stuffing the mouth with garlic. This is another one that is often done as a way of stopping a vampire and also a preventative measure. Shooting the vampire with a blessed bullet. Now, this is a blessed bullet, not a silver bullet. While we did discuss that silver is seen as a pure metal, just the bullet being blessed in this particular instance would be enough to take a vampire down. And sunlight. So let's talk about the stakes. Stakes were originally used for paupers' graves. A person would be buried, and they would be buried not super deep, and oftentimes without a coffin. Because of this, when rains would come through, the bodies would be washed out of the grave and would end up kind of back out in the elements again. So as a way to combat this, they started driving iron or wood stakes through the heart of the body to kind of keep it in place, so that the ground had time to settle enough that the body wouldn't come back out again when the rain came. Beheading, as I mentioned before, which was seen as a way to combat, but also as a preventative measure. This one's pretty easy to understand. If something is attacking and all of a sudden you take its head off, it's not going to be attacking anymore, and if it is, it's not going to be super effective. The extra step of adding the garlic was, as we discussed earlier, a thing with rabies and the heightened sense of smell. And of course, just shooting the goddamn thing. If it's evil, the church can kill it. Therefore, having a bullet blessed makes the bullet God's bullet. God can kill anything, therefore shooting it with a blessed bullet can kill it. This has also meant that the church had to be around in order to handle the job, which goes along in the same vein of silver being used for fighting other things, and the lore that vampires cannot step foot on hallowed ground. So particularly if you go to the church, the vampires can't get you there because it's ground sanctified by God. And of course, dragging the damn thing out at morning. This kind of goes with vampires not being seen doing the attacking. Therefore, it must be happening at night when you can't see. So, if it's attacking at night, then it must be because it can't come out during the day. So, if it comes out during the day, then it must be cursed by God, and therefore sunlight kills it. This also goes along with the idea of porphyria, where a person standing out in the sunlight can greatly damage their skin. Can it be avoided? Often the bodies were buried face down. I know that's been a joke for a few decades, just like bury me upside down so everyone can kiss my ass. Well, at the time, people were buried upside down because that way they couldn't figure out how to get back out again if they were buried. So by putting them upside down, you were preventing them from becoming a vampire by them just being confused which way is up. Also, staking is a way of keeping them in the grave. It's if you pound a stake through its heart, it's gonna be stuck there. So that kind of makes it so the vampire can't get back out again. We do have some accounts of vampires, or people believed to have been vampires, being buried with a brick in their mouth. And some bodies would just be outright beheaded and have garlic put into their mouth, but these were not as common. So some people have seen these grave cages and believe that this was people in the past saying that they didn't want the dead to come back to life. That's not true. These were actually meant as a way to keep grave robbers out. If a person is buried with a lot of effects, or they just didn't want somebody to steal the body, they would put it in a cage. Now, around the 18th century, universities were looking for cadavers because they were beginning to do more and more research into the human body to try and learn what made us tick. Because of that, they needed dead bodies. And a lot of times they would just pay for a dead body, not caring where the body came from. There are some cases of serial killers just killing mass amounts of people and then selling the bodies to the university. And the university doesn't care where they came from. They just need a body for their work. Is that the end? I thought I had more than that. Yeah, so that kind of wraps up our lore on vampires. Let me do this really quick. So, a lot of what we see of vampiric lore is a matter of people just not understanding. Because we need a way to explain things to ourselves so that we know why something is happening and we can make it less scary. We see people drawing conclusions that are obviously not true. Being able to go back and take a look at these things is incredibly important, not only to science, but to understanding how previous generations approached these things. My family died, and I have no way of knowing why they died. They were fine, and then all of a sudden they were dead. Well, something must have attacked them. Well, what could have attacked them? Well, I saw them kind of like fading away, so it must have been something stealing their life. My son died, and now my family members are slowly dying off one by one by one. Obviously, he turned into a vampire and is now attacking the family. Trying to put justification to things that they don't quite understand. And these are important things to look at. More importantly, I urge anyone who liked the lecture to please continue doing research on your own. There are several very good papers that you can get your hands on. I got one in particular. It cost me like $45 to get a copy of it for myself, which is a bit pricey, but at the same time, it's going to pay the person who wrote the article. And at these points, they're peer reviewed. So if there's issues, somebody else is going to take that article and say, hey, I don't think this is correct because this. Articles are a great place to get information, in particular when you're looking for things like this. A new interest in vampires in the 20th century and the early 2000s. I think it just went along with the idea of being edgy. The idea, how to put into words. Um, when we were teenagers, the romanticizing of vampires, I would believe starts with Anne Rice. That's when we start seeing really the suave debonair vampires. You could argue Dracula. Dracula is a weird case simply because he's not really a vampire. It's taking a historical figure and just saying, "Oh, he was super bloody in his conquests. He must have been a vampire." Well, no, he was just an asshole. Like, Vlad the Impaler just really enjoyed killing people, and he really enjoyed making other people realize he could kill people. So when Hans Christian Andersen comes along and writes Dracula, he's not really taking a whole lot of things from the historical character so much as he is just taking a name and saying, "Oh yeah, and also he did this, and also he did this." So I would, sorry, I got on a tangent about Dracula, but I would argue Dracula is more a vampire in name. But in terms of romanticizing, I believe that starts around when Anne Rice writes Interview with a Vampire, which kind of kicks off our romanticization and our interest in the 20th and early noughts. Also, the idea that at the time, a lot of people in the culture are, angsty teenagers, and we just want to feel important. And the idea that, "Oh, I'm not really a person, I'm an undead vampire, and I love you, but I'm dangerous, and you don't want to be near me." I think that has a lot of what draws us into vampires in the 20th century, and especially the early noughts. And then the when you throw in the kind of obsession with gothic culture that arises with that as well, but it's not like gothic, it's like edgy dark gothic. I think that would explain why vampirism makes a return in the 20th century in terms of interest. One thing I really wanted to touch on before, yes, the idea of being young forever, I believe too. That in taking this, you not only gain great power, but you are youthful forever, and you're super strong, and you can do this, that, and the other. I could totally see that as being a reason why somebody would be interested in vampirism. And of course, Dracula himself has kind of become synonymous with vampires as being like the quintessential vampire. Um, if we look at Dracula, uh, Vlad the Impaler, he really didn't do a whole lot that was vampiric as a person. He just kind of got tagged on with the stuff later on because of the story. Vlad the Impaler was like, Dracula just means son of the dragon. His father was referred to as the dragon, and when he passed away and Vlad took over, he became Dracula, son of the dragon. And then we would know him later on as Vlad the Impaler because he really, really enjoyed sticking people on sticks and then just waiting for them to die on their own. Ooh, excuse me. I'm still trying to figure out how to talk properly during lectures. If anybody else has any other questions. There were also some other things that I wanted to touch on, but I just couldn't find enough information on them. Particularly, uh, not being able to step on sanctified ground, not being able to cross open water. That was a particular one, as vampires can't transport over sea. Uh, there has been talk of. Oh yeah, he was great. Actually, if you want to go look at the history of Vlad the Impaler, uh, Extra Credits History has a like 3 or 4 part series on Dracula and like who he was. I highly recommend that one. It's a really good deep dive into the life of Dracula and really how he rose up to become the uh, historical figure that he was, but also how he ended up getting dragged into the whole vampire thing. Um, but as I was saying, vampires can't cross open water. This, however, was countered later by saying that if a vampire travels with the dirt of the grave they were buried in, they can cross open water. So the idea would be that uh, the coffin would be lined with graveyard dirt, and in doing that, it would prevent the vampire from being injured. Also, the idea that you have to be invited in. We see this much later on. In all honesty, it comes because they bring it up in the Lost Boys, but it's also brought up in uh, Stephen King's novel Salem's Lot, where the vampires can't come in unless they're invited in, and so they use psychic abilities to kind of convince people to let them in. But I hope everybody enjoyed the lecture. I know it was super short. You'd think with all these months I'd have a much longer lecture, but I just haven't had time to actually sit down and do like hyper in-depth research, and I kind of put myself off of the topic to begin with by getting a little too overly ambitious with the whole trying to prove my point about the church using vampires as a way of uh, maintaining loyalty in the 18th century. Like the idea that, you know, there are things that go bump in the night, but the only people who can stop it are the church, therefore you need to have them around. I still firmly believe that could be argued, but I just don't have the proper evidence to back it up. Especially since when we look at vampires, a lot of what stops them is stuff that's Christian based. They can't step on sanctified ground. They can't, or they are averse to religious artifacts, in particular crosses. Having a bullet that's been blessed by a priest that is able to kill them, things like these, this would come much, much later on and is a result of Christianity coming into the area. So I believe it could be argued that because of these things, sorry, words. The church kind of pushes this as a way of keeping themselves in everybody's mind. It's not just that you are seeking, you know, a heavenly reward, but also there's things out there that can be very dangerous, and the best way to keep them away from you is to have the church nearby. But yeah, like I my eyes were a little bit too big, like a little bit bigger than my stomach on that one. And after trying to like really delve into the research to back up that claim, I realized that this was going to end up being way larger than I could handle by myself. And so I had to really dial back the lecture itself and focus on just the quintessentials. What is a vampire? What causes it? How do you fight it? Why do we believe these things? I'm working on the next two lectures. I really want to touch on American politics, not so much as how it is today, but the bare bones system itself as a way of understanding how things are run. In hopes that people will want to learn more about the system. In America currently, knowing politics is incredibly important. So I believe bringing it up in a lecture would hopefully help some people in the process itself. I also really want to do a lecture on the Battle of Elysium, which is a super intense fight between the Gauls and Rome that ends with Rome winning out the fight, but it's several days of just nonsense fighting, and it's one of my favorite fights to really break down and analyze. Sorry, I outpaced myself there. It's just like, whew. I'd also really like to break down uh, other cryptids later on, being able to look at like Sasquatch, Nessie, touching on vampire or not vampires. We already did vampires, but werewolves and like where the aversion to silver came from and like what causes it. Because werewolf lore is actually super intense, and there's even like there's accounts of people who claim to be werewolves, but like they claim to be werewolves, but they claim to be werewolves of God. So like it was believed that being a werewolf was something that was given to you by Satan as both as either a curse or a blessing for like being loyal. And there were like bands of people who believed that like they got the powers from Satan and then turned on him and went after other werewolves in their werewolf form. And the church had no idea how to handle that. You're just like, oh, so you're like outright admitting that you're a werewolf, but like you're also doing things in the name of God. So can we really punish you for that? And then there's like several different ways that werewolves become like werewolves and transform. Um, there's a recent animation that uses some like very different pieces of werewolf lore to make a very coherent and really fascinating story between the like if you get bit you become one. You don't physically transform into one. It's something that happens when you're asleep and like you astral project as a werewolf. Like it does a really good job, and I wish that I could remember what it was off the top of my head because I know it's not Wolf Children. That was a different anime that still had werewolves, but not not that kind. And I'd really like to touch on just about anything else that other people want to touch on. I don't have time for it today. Otherwise, I'd say let's jump into a game and start like fucking around with things. But I've got a really intense day on Monday, so I'm actually gonna probably wrap it up here and then post the VOD. You'll be able to follow me on my Twitter, and I will let everybody know when I intend to do more lectures. Game content. There's a lot that I want to play and I really want to get people involved in. The new Pokemon game is really good if anybody hasn't played it yet. Like I was trying not to spoil myself with it so I wasn't watching anybody else play it, and then like I watched one person play like part of like the midpoint of the game and I was like, oh, I want to play this now. So I ended up dropping a bit of money from my paycheck to make sure that I got a copy. And I do have the streaming thing. Like, I can stream from my Switch. It's just a matter of sitting down and figuring out what chord connects to what, and then I can do it. But I think that's gonna wrap up our lecture for today. One of these days I'll manage to last longer than an hour. But please follow me on Twitter at